Hi, it's Amy from American Quilting and Under the Garden Moon, and today I'm going to show you how to foundation paper piece. So you're going to need several items. So the first thing you're going to need is your pattern, and you're going to cut it apart so that it's just a little bit outside of the trim lines. So you can see these little dashed lines. You're going to trim about 1/8 of an inch just outside of those trim lines. So here's what it looks like after you've got it all cut into parts. These patterns are labeled with colors. R means R, BL is black, BE is beige, and so those are labeled for you. But if you want to do that on your own, if a pattern isn't labeled, I suggest to do that so that you know which color you're going to sew where. The next thing you're going to do is fold your patterns. And you're going to need a little flexible ruler like this. This one is a regular ruler, 6-inch ruler, and this one is a metric 6-inch ruler. Either one will work, and you're going to mark a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So you're going to take all of your little papers individually, and you're going to notice that they're numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you're going to lay the ruler so that you're going to put a fold inside the bigger number. So you're always going to start with 1, and so the fold will be in 2. Then you're going to do another fold in 3, and another fold in 4, and another fold in 5. I use this shaded area, you can see this on the metric ruler. That's just kind of a scant 1/4 inch, and I just like that amount of seam. If you're using a regular ruler, you're going to put it so that the 1/4 inch mark is on the solid line on your pattern. So I put a fold in number 2. Now I'm going to put a fold in number 3. I'm going to put a fold in number 4. And as I'm folding, you're going to notice that you're going to do a fold just outside of every seam line that's on the pattern. So we're going to fold all the pieces that go to our quilt block, and then we'll get back to you when we start to sew. Okay, now I have all of my papers all folded, and now I'm ready to tack with a little bit of glue the first piece. So you look at the pattern, and I've labeled this that the number 1 is beige. And so on the back, I put a little dab of glue, and then I put my square that I've pre-cut. Over here are all of my pre-cut pieces so that I can have everything ready to go, and your instructions for pre-cutting are on your pattern. Okay, so to do this, I have 2 left to glue. So here's my number 1 spot. I always just hold my finger on it and turn it over so I know where I'm putting my glue. And I just use a little glue stick and put a little tiny dab. It's beige and it's a triangle shape. So I'm going to get one of my triangles, and then when I put it on there, I'm going to line it up so that the straight edge is lined up on the fold. And I'm going to center it because I've trimmed my pattern so it's pretty close to the same amount around all the sides. Then I'm going to hold my pattern up to the light and look through it and make sure that this triangle has a seam allowance around all 3 sides. So pre-cutting your fabric is really important when you're doing paper piecing. Instead of just getting a big hunk of fabric and then laying it on and then having to flip it and trim it, it's much easier to just guess big and put a big triangle on where you know it's going to work. Okay, and I always glue all my number 1 pieces for that block so that I'm ready to sew, and then I can chain piece several of these. And I know where to glue because I have my fold or my trim line. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at number 2. Here's number 2, and it's a black, and it's a triangle. So I'm going to find one of my black triangles, and that's piece number 2. I'm going to place it, this is right side up. I've glued the back side of the fabric. I'm going to put number 2 fabric on it, and I'm going to line up along that raw edge. Then I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and I'm going to flip it over. And I'm going to sew. Do you want that light off? I'm going to sew along that solid line. And since this seam is close to the edge, I'm going to go right off the paper. I always use a leader if I can, so that I don't have to have long tails. Then I'm going to take it to my ironing board and I'm going to open it up and I'm going to press it. And you can see where I've sewn right along that solid line. And since I know what size this triangle is going to be, next I'm going to look and make sure that I've got a seam allowance. I'll just hold it up to the light and make sure. And then I'll press it, and then I will do another few. So I'm going to sew one more piece on another section of my block, and I'm going to always remember to glue the back side of the first piece so that this is going to be, the right side is going to be on the back of your paper. So I'm going to place right sides together, and when you flip it over, just kind of make sure that you don't fold under the fabric, and you're going to want to try and sew as straight as you can on those lines. Now this piece is my center. My first piece was beige, my next one is gold. So I'm going to put a gold one on, and what you're doing every single time is you're just going to sew on the line, and then when you press, it'll flip over. Sometimes you have to just make sure that your stuff is placed well, and you can kind of see through the paper a little bit, and I'm just going to make sure that that triangle looks centered. I can see my faint line under there and my faint line there, so there's about the same amount on both sides of that. And that'll help so that your triangles and your pieces, as you sew them on, won't be short when you go to press them. So when I do this, I just pay attention. I have all my pieces on my sewing table now, and I'm just going to sew all my number 2s onto my number 1s. And so you just have to look at every piece to make sure that you're doing the right color. And I chain stitch them so that I don't have a bunch of starts and stops. This little piece, you're going to start, there's 2 like this, and one you're going to start with beige and one you're going to start with gold. So just look at the numbers and the letters and the colors that you've labeled it. And then you're just going to sew everything. Now this piece has number 2 on it, and so after it's pressed, you can just finger press 2 instead of using your iron if you want. Okay, my next piece is number 3, and it's a beige, and it's a triangle. So I'm going to get one of my beige triangles, and when I flip my pattern over, I'm going to realize that here's my fold, and can you see that shape right there? That's the direction my triangle is going to go. So I flip it right sides together so that after it's sewn, it'll turn like this. And so you just kind of have to learn how to place your triangles and your other pieces so they're going the right direction. And when you're doing a seam that ends in the middle of your unit, like this one, you go out a little ways past, about 1/4 of an inch past, and backstitch, and then you're going to have to take it out of your machine. Here's one more that's ready for piece number 3. And it's a beige triangle, and it's going to go right here, so I'm going to flip it this way. then when I turn it over, I see my seam. So you continue to do this until all your pieces are covered. See, this unit is now done, so I'm going to press it and then set it aside. This unit, I would suggest starting with the straight units first, because then you're not going to get mixed up and you'll get the hang of it before you do the little trickier ones. Triangles are tricky. That's why I have you pre-cut them. Okay, now after you have all the number 2s on, you're going to trim. And you're only going to trim the fabric, and I can tell where I need to trim this by following those fold lines. So I'm going to look at my pattern. I'm going to flip it over. Here's number 3, and so I'm going to fold in number 3. And then I'm going to look at the other side, and I'm going to make sure that I'm trimming in the right spot. And you can just take a pair of scissors, and you're going to trim that excess fabric off. When I fold this back, I hope you can see that my trim was right along that fold line, which is 1/4 of an inch past. My number 3 piece is black, so I take my black square and I put it on here, and I'm going to line up those raw edges, and then I'm going to sew that seam across. And you start and stop your seams 1/4 of an inch at least once you get past there. And I'm going to take this one out of the machine so that I can show you and repeat that process of trim. Okay, number 3 is sewn on. I'm going to press it. And you can see it's not as important that this is straight because our squares are extra big and I have extra paper to allow for a little bit of crookedness. So I'm going to fold. The fold is going to, number 4 is next, so my fold line is in 4. I fold it right there. I trim that fairly close to the fold, and then I look at my piece. The next one is gold, so I'm going to add another gold piece. So every time you add a piece after you've got number 2 sewn on, you're going to fold the paper, you're going to trim off the excess fabric, and then you're ready to trim, to move on. So here's one of our triangle units, and I've got 1, 2, and here's 3 that I just sewed. I would open it up and press it, and then I'm ready to trim. So the piece that I would trim, this is number 4. So the way that I'm going to trim that is I'm going to do the fold that goes in number 4, and if you've got fabric sewn down, just pinch it so that you can trim it off. And I'm going to trim that even though it's just a little bit. And this is the side that I trim because that's next to piece number 4. I'm not going to worry about piece number 5 yet. This is another beige triangle, and do you see that it's going to go that direction? So I'm going to put this down. I can see through my paper that my solid line is right there, so I'm going to make this just a little titch bigger so that it'll hang out past once I sew it and flip it. This one has to start in the middle, so I just start just a little bit past my seam line. And then I fold it open and finger press. Okay, my only piece left on these units is this number 5. You can see this isn't straight at all along here, and that's why we're going to fold it, the fold that's in number 5, and I'm going to trim off anything extra that's in that seam allowance. Okay, now number 5 says it's red, So I'll get a big red triangle. It's going to go this direction, so I flip it over and I line up that raw edge. And I'm going to sew clear across, and then I go off the edge. Okay, now I'm going to take it to my sewing machine, or to my ironing board, sorry. I'm going to press it with my iron. And now I'm going to trim it. Now I would sew all pieces of this pattern. All 7 pieces, I would get them all to this point. And now you're going to trim it. So you're going to get a ruler that has a nice quarter edge on it. And usually paper piecing patterns have that little dashed line around it, but always use a ruler instead of the dashed lines. Okay, so you're going to put the 1/4 inch marking right on that line. And you're going to trim it so that there's a 1/4 inch seam allowance. This month in Saturday Sampler you're doing 2 blocks. I would start with the other block, the night and noon block, because it's a little bit easier and it's bigger pieces than this. And see how that unit ends up being all finished. Then here's another one, and so when I go to sew my block together, they're going to be all finished and ready to sew together. There's a couple of options when you go to sew the units together. Some people say to never tear off the paper until you're done, but I kind of like to, so you're just going to have to practice and see what you like. When you go to tear the paper off, it's easier to kind of crease it along the stitching, and then you just tear it off. And if there's little pieces that don't come off, just get them with your fingernails or a pair of tweezers, or you can get them out fairly easy. And you'll see that you'll end up with a bunch of little tiny spots where you've crossed over, and that's partly why I don't like to leave my paper on when I sew the separate units together. But you can get them out, and then you can sew the units together. And since you've trimmed the 1/4 inch, you should be able to put them together fairly easy without having any problems. And we'll take a picture of the block when it's all done, and then we're all finished. So here's the picture of our finished block. It's called Duck and Ducklings. It's the D block for Saturday Sampler at American Quilting in the month of January. I hope that you enjoy paper piecing. I think it's kind of fun, and it's a good way to do things that are harder with a ruler. Now, some of you would look at this block and say there's no reason why we didn't just regular piece that. The reason is this measurement right here is something to a 1/16 of an inch, and it's just too hard to get that to the right size. And so when you paper piece, it allows you to do everything so that it's the right size. This is a 6.5 inch square block, and so it ends up being 6.5, even though this is a very odd measurement. It's kind of like 1 3/16 finished. So anyway, enjoy it and have fun.